All right, hello again, everyone. I didn't start the recording right away, and I really should have. Just haven't been feeling it lately. But I got to a point in the reading where I thought, yeah, I think I can start reading here. But another part of me is thinking, what I'm doing really isn't what I should be doing. Like I should be reading it word for word and not synopsizing it and then reading it word for word halfway through the paper. But I don't even know why I'm bothering doing this. I know why it's important, but I just don't see a point. I thought I could teach people something. But I don't think people want to learn. I don't think people are willing to listen. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that it's there. What matters is that I can go back and revisit this. That there's footage of this. A reminder of a time when everything was just so painful. So these readings I have to do for school, I'm telling myself I might as well do them so that other people can see them. And my hope is that even if nobody sees it, at least I know I did something to at least try to teach people. So that's what this is. This is me trying to teach with what's been given to me. So I'm going to try really hard. I'm going to try really hard to not give up here, to keep pushing forward. So what it was talking about in the beginning, it's writing about it, making it seem like someone didn't write this. Saidiya Hartman, the Anarchy of Colored Girls assembled in a riotous manner. And I know it's going to be really crappy for me to do this, to just synopsize the first 10 pages, but because there's so much in these first 10 pages, like it doesn't really do it justice for me to just synopsize it. But the thing that I think connects with what we were talking about in this class is how what the author is saying is that Black women used to believe that there was only one path in life, and that was just being subservient to white people and doing jobs they didn't want to do, but because they had to do them. And so in the context of this class where it's all about queering and sort of looking at things differently and imagining how things could be different, I think that's what this article is saying, is that Black women are in this time period considering how there's more to life than just being subservient to another group of people. But this paragraph just sort of goes over the racial profiling that happened. And before July 17th, 1917, Esther Brown had not been accosted by police. She had never been arrested. But it talks about how she did get arrested and sort of how it was sort of baloney. Like you didn't really need to be breaking the law in order to be considered a lawbreaker. And even worse, the real offense was blackness. Your status made you a criminal. The telltale sign of future criminality was a dark face. So what they were saying back then was that we need to sort of be aware of the crimes that they could commit in the future based off of where they're at right now. Nearly 80% of those who appeared before the magistrate judge were sentenced to serve time. It didn't matter if it was your first encounter with the law. Vagrancy statutes and tenement house laws made young Black women vulnerable to arrest and transformed sexual acts, even consensual ones, with no cash exchanging into criminal offenses. What mattered was not what you had done, but the prophetic power of the police to predict future crime, to anticipate the mugshot in the bright eyes and intelligent face of Esther Brown. So I started recording here because, like I said, I just haven't been feeling it this week, and I'm really busy and stressed out. And I know that's no excuse, but I also have to acknowledge the fact that it's not my job to make these recordings, and I'm making it my job. And so it doesn't come without undue stress. But what's more important is that people should learn what I'm saying, and I don't want this to stay in a vacuum. At least there's a potential for it to not stay in the vacuum when I can put it on YouTube. Even though the odds of someone finding it are very slim, it's still there. I think that is the whole point of archiving, is that it's there and you can find it and you can see it and you can revisit it and you can question what's there and what isn't there, what's absent. Anyway, I'm gonna try moving the camera down here because my webcam's down here. So I get the feeling this will look a little bit more natural in terms of me looking at the camera and then looking at me to make sure I don't look like a doofus. So let's begin, because this part is what seemed to be the most like learning part of it. When you see the like a year in 1349, it's like, okay, we're about to learn something. So I thought this whole thing, this whole article that I'm reading is definitely a chance to learn something. But at the same time, I didn't want to be reading the whole thing because this is a big read. And I wanted to make sure that, let me make a point and emphasize that just because I start reading here doesn't mean that this from here on out is the most important part of this paper. It's why I try to revisit it and say this right here, the prophetic power to predict future crime. Like, it didn't matter what you did, even what you did, loitering, riotous and disorderly, solicitation, violation of tenement house law. And that's the thing that really got me. The whole, like, you could have sex with someone voluntarily, willingly, consensually, and yet you would still be charged with a crime of some kind. And that's just ridiculous to me. But anyway, I'm going to stop giving all this filler, and I'm going to go ahead and dive right in to try to keep this video a little shorter than possible, because I think the longer the video, the less likely people are going to watch it. So here we go. In 1349, the first vagrancy statute was passed in England. The law was a response to the shortage of labor in the aftermath of the Black Plague, and it was designed to conscript those who refused to labor. The vagrancy laws of England were adopted in the North American colonies and invigorated with a new force and scope after emancipation and the demise of Reconstruction after the Civil War. They replaced the Black Codes, which had been deemed unconstitutional, but resurrected involuntary servitude in guises amenable to the terms liberty and equality. In the South, vagrancy laws became a surrogate for slavery, forcing ex-slaves to remain on the plantation and radically restricting their movement, recreating slavery in all but name. In northern cities, vagrancy statutes, too, were intended to compel the property of the idle, to compel the labor of the idle, and more importantly, to control the propertyless. Those without proof of employment were considered likely to commit or be involved in vice and crime. All right. Those without proof of employment. So this is what happens. If you are homeless, you don't have a place of residence. So finding a job is a lot harder for you because there's no place for your checks to be sent. You know, that you have to have a proof of residence in order to have a job, and that can't really happen. You can't get a job without a proof of residence. So what this is saying made me think of that, because it's saying if you don't have a job, you're more likely to commit crime. Well, duh, because if you don't have a source of income, you need to have a source of income somehow. If that means stealing stuff and selling it so that you can have money, that makes sense to me, all morality aside. What this is saying is it's immoral to put Black people in this situation in the first place. But let me continue. Vagrancy statutes provided the legal means to master the newly masterless. The origins of the workhouse and the labor of correction can be traced to these efforts to force the idle to labor, to manage and regulate the ex-serf and ex-slave, when lordship and bondage assumed a more indirect form. These statutes restricted and regulated Black movement and punished the forms of intimacy that could not be categorized or settled by the question, is this man your husband? Those without proof of employment and refusing to labor were in all likelihood guilty of crime, vagrancy, or prostitution. Vagrancy was a status, not a crime. It was not doing, withholding, non-participation, the refusal to be settled or bound by contract, a husband or employer. This refusal of a social order based on monogamous marriage or wage labor was penalized. Common law defined the vagrant as someone who wandered about without visible means of support. William Blackstone, in his 1765 Commentaries on the Law of England, defined vagrants as those who wake on the night and sleep in the day and haunt taverns and alehouses and roused about, and no man knows from where they came or whither they go. The statutes targeted those who maintain excessive notions of freedom and imagined that liberty included the right not to work. In short, vagrants were the deracinated. Let's Google that word. Deracinated, uprooted from one's natural geographical, social, or cultural environment. One more time. Deracinated. I like it. I don't like the word. Well, I like learning new words. In short, vagrants were the deracinated, migrants, wanderers, displaced persons, and strangers. Status offenses were critical to the remaking of a racist order in the aftermath of slavery and accelerated the growing disparity between Black and white rates of incarceration in northern cities at the beginning of the 20th century. While the legal transformation from slavery to freedom is most often narrated as the shift from status to contract, from property to subject, from slave to Negro, vagrancy statutes make apparent the continuities and entanglements between a diverse range of unfree states, from slave to servant, from servant to vagrant, from a domestic to prisoner, from idler to convict and felon. Involuntary servitude wasn't one condition, chattel slavery, nor was it fixed in time and place. Rather, it was an ever-changing mode of exploitation, domination, accumulation, the serving of will, the theft of capacity, the appropriation of life, and confinement. Anti-Black racism fundamentally shaped the development of status criminality. In turn, status criminality was tethered ineradicably to Blackness. So yes, we have to remake the idea of what constitutes a criminal, I guess. Like, it's just because you are this means that you must be a criminal, or that you must be a vagrant, or whatever. Being a vagrant is what makes you a criminal. Not quite 2 centuries after the conspiracy to burn down New York was hatched at a black and tan dive called Houston's Tavern, Black assembly and the threat of tumult still made New York's ruling elite quake in fear. The state was as intent on preventing the dangers and consequences posed by Negroes assembled in a riotous manner. Gatherings that were too loud or too unruly or too queer, hotels and cabarets that welcomed Black and white patrons, Black and tan dives frequented by Chinese men and white girls or Black women with Italian paramours, or house parties and buffet flats offering refuge to pansies, lady lovers, and inverts, were deemed disorderly, promiscuous, and morally depraved. These forms of intimate association and unregulated assembly threatened the public good by transgressing the color line and eschewing the dominant mores. The lives of the wayward were riotous, queer, disposed to extravagance and wanton living. This promiscuous sociality fueled a moral panic, identified and mobilized by the city's ruling elite to justify the extravagant use of police power. Funnily enough, the police in New York City were actually created to keep an eye on people who were not elitists, like Irish people, Black people, just people who would wander the streets because that was a social place to be. The police patrolled those streets in order to keep an eye on people, and they were also more keen to rough up street shop people, like street vendors, as opposed to people who own property fronts. The police would go in and bust up these street vendors because they were taking business away from people who own property and storefronts. But anyway, just a little interesting bit of history there for you. Penal laws against disorderly conduct, disorderly houses, disorderly persons, unlawful assembly, criminal anarchy, and vagrancy were intended to regulate intimacy and association. Police styles of comportment dictate how one assumed gender and who one loved, and thwart free movement and errant paths through the city. Esther Brown was confronted with a choice that was no choice at all: volunteer for servitude or be commanded by the law. Vagrancy statutes were implemented and expanded to conscript young colored women to domestic work and regulate them in proper households, that is, male-headed households with a proper he, not merely someone pretending to be a husband or merely outfitted like a man, not lovers passing for sisters, or a pretend Mrs. shacking up with a boarder, not households comprising 3 women and a child. For state authorities, black homes were disorderly houses, as they were marked by the taint of promiscuity, pathology, and illegality, sheltering nameless children and strangers, nurturing intimacy outside the bounds of the law, not organized by the sexual dyad, and not ruled by the father, and producing criminals, not citizens. The domestic was the locus of danger. It threatened social reproduction rather than ensured it. Is this man your husband? Where's the father of your child? Such questions, if not answered properly, might land you in the workhouse or reformatory. With incredible ferocity, state surveillance and police power acted to shape the black household and regulate intimate life. Affiliation and kinship organized along alternate lines. An open mesh of possibilities was suspect and likely to yield crime. The discretionary power granted the police in discerning future crime would have an enormous impact on black social life and the making of the ghetto. So when I was first reading this right here, the male-headed household, a proper male-headed household, proper he, that just makes me think that they're perpetuating heteronormativity. Like men have to be with women. And so like, is a woman just not allowed to be with another woman? Like it says here, 3 women and 1 child living in the same house is like not households comprising 3 women and a child. So like the proper way is to do it with a man and a woman, and like, I don't know, it just seems to be perpetuating that too. I might write about that. The plantation, the ghetto, and the prison were coeval. One mode of confinement and enclosure did not supersede the other, but extended the state of servitude, violence, and death in a new guise. The aftermath of slavery unfolded in a tenement hallway and held Esther Brown in its grasp. Plainly put, the Negro problem in the North was the arrival of the ex-slave in the city, and the moral panic and the race riots that erupted across the country document the reach of the plantation and the enduring status of the black as fungible life, eternal alien, and non-citizen. The plantation was not abolished, but transformed. I think that's a pretty potent way of putting it. The problem of crime was the threat posed by the black presence in the city. The problem of crime was the wild experiment in black freedom, and the efforts to manage and regulate this crisis provided a means of solidifying and extending the color line that defined urban space, reproducing the disavowed apartheid of everyday life. State violence, incarceration, and controlled depletion defined the world that Esther Brown wanted to destroy. It made her the sort of girl who would not hesitate to smash things up. I'm going to take a quick pause right here. All right, let's resume. The letter of her ex-husband didn't say if the article appeared in the Metro column of the Amsterdam News or the New York City Briefs, in the Chicago Defender, or the City News section of the New York Herald, in which case only a few lines dedicated to the when, where, and how would have appeared, just the cold hard facts. Perhaps accompanied by statistics that documented the rising rate of prostitution or the increasing numbers of young colored women arrested for solicitation in violation of the Tenement House law. It would not have been a showy or sensationalist headline like Silken Lights blamed for Harlem Girls' demise, or a lead story of moral crisis and the sexual panic manufactured by vice commissions and urban reformers. If the details were especially sordid, a column or two might be devoted to a young woman's demise. All her ex-husband said was that a rush of sadness and disbelief had washed over him as he tried to figure out his Esther, his baby, had come to be involved in such trouble. He encouraged her to be a good girl, and he promised to take care of her when she was released, something he had failed to do in the few months they lived together as husband and wife in her mother's home. Now that it was too late, he was trying to be steady. The letter was posted on army stationery, and it was filled with assurances about his love, promises about trying to be a better man, and pleading that she would do better. You will not live happy, he cautioned, until your wild world ends. He hoped she had learned a long-lost lesson in the wild world of fun and pleasure. Ooh-wee. Esther's grandmother and sister didn't know that she had been arrested until they saw her name in the daily newspaper. They were in disbelief. It wasn't true. It couldn't be. Anyone in Harlem could tell you that stool pigeons were paid to lie. Everyone knew Krause was working for the cops. He would sell his own mama for $1. Besides, if anyone was to blame for Esther's trouble, her grandmother thought it was her mother, Rose. She was jealous of the girl, mostly because of the attention paid to Esther by the men boarding in the rented rooms of her flat. Rose was living with one of them as her husband, although the relation, properly speaking, was outside the bounds of the law. When Rose heard the news of her daughter's arrest, it confirmed what she believed. The girl was headed for trouble. Sometime in the country and not running the streets might steady her. She confided to the social worker, tipping the hand that would decide her daughter's fate. What passed for material concern was a long list of complaints about Esther's manner of living. Rose told the colored probation officer, Miss Campbell, that her daughter had never worked more than 6 weeks at a time and usually stayed in a place only a couple of weeks. She wouldn't stay put or keep a job. She had a good husband and she left him. She was young and flighty and did not want to be tied down to one husband. What more was there to say? The neighbors told a different story. The mother is the one who needs to be sent away. Everyone knew Rose Saunders consorted with one of the men who lodged in her apartment. What kind of example is that for a girl? That's no straight road. The letter from Esther's girlfriend was nothing like her husband's. It didn't plead for her to be a good girl or beg her to leave the wild world behind or caution her to take the straight road, but instead be reminded of all her pleasures awaiting her when she received her free papers, not the least of these being Alice's love. Dear little girl, just a few lines to let you know that everything is okay. I suppose you think I was foolish to leave Peekskill, but I could not stand the work. I have not been used to working so hard when I leave Bedford, and why should I do so when I don't have to? You stay where you are, as you'd expect to live in New York when you are free. It will surprise you. I'm going to be married next month. Not that I care much, but for protection. I went to New York Sunday and seen quite a number of old friends and heard all the scandal and then some. New York is wide open, plenty of white stuff and everything you want, so cheer up. There are plenty of good times in store for you. So I must close with the same old love, wishing you well. It's not clear if Esther had the chance to read Alice's letter. This missive of contraband love was seized by prison authorities and included with the disciplinary reports and the notes from the staff meetings, augmenting the folio of documents that formed the case file and invited greater punishment. Attitude. She is inclined to be sullen and defiant, came to Bedford with the impression that this was a very bad place and decided that she would not let any of the matrons run over her. She said, if they keep yelling at her, they'll find that isn't the way to treat Esther Brown, and Esther Brown isn't going to stand for that. Note, patient is a colored girl with good mentality who has had her own way and enjoyed much freedom. The influence of her family and her environment have both been bad. She is the hyperkinetic type which craves continually activity and amusement. Pause one more time. Okay, riot and refrain. The reporters are most interested in what happened to the white girls. Ruth Carter, Stella Kramer, and Maisie Rice were the names that appeared in the newspapers. Ruth was the first one to tell the State Prison Commission about the terrible things done to them at Bedford Hills. They were handcuffed in the cells of Rebecca Hall's. They were stripped and their mouths gagged with dirty rags and harsh soap. They were beaten with rubber hoses and handcuffed to their cots. They were hung from the doors of their cells with their feet barely reaching the ground. They were given the water treatment and their faces immersed in water until they could hardly breathe, and they were isolated for weeks and months behind the double doors of the cells in the disciplinary building. The double door prevented any light from entering, and the lack of air made the dank smell of the dark chamber and their waste and rank unwashed bodies unbearable. The stench, sensory deprivation, and the isolation were intended to break them. There were 275 inmates and 21 babies. The young women ranged in age from 14 to 30, and the majority were city girls exiled to the country for moral reform. They came from crowded tenements. 80% of the young women at Bedford had been subjected to some form of punishment, confined in their rooms for a week, confined in the cells of Rebecca Hall, confined in the disciplinary building. Even the State Prison Commission was forced to concede it was cruel and unusual punishment. It was a reformatory in name only, and there was nothing modern or therapeutic about its disciplinary measures. When asked if hanging girls up, handcuffing them, and beating them with hoses was abusive, one matron replied, if you don't quell them or rule them with an iron hand, you cannot live with these people. Oh my God. When questioned as to why she failed to mention such punishments, the prison superintendent, Ms. Helen Cobb, responded that she hadn't mentioned such practices because she considered them treatment, not punishment. The smallest infractions invited harsh punishment. A complaint about dinner, a sheet of stationery found tucked under a mattress, or dancing in a lewd manner might be punished with a week locked in your room, or confined in Rebecca Hall, or stripped and tied to a cell door in the disciplinary building. Black girls are more likely to be punished and to be punished more harshly. Loretta Mitchie was the only colored girl quoted in the newspaper article. The prison authorities resented that the inmates had been named at all. It fueled the public hysteria about the abuses and endowed the atrocities with the face and a story. Loretta and several other Black women testified before the State Prison Commission about how Miss Cobb and Miss Minogue treated them. Perhaps it was because the 16-year-old had curly hair, dark brown eyes, and a pretty face that caught the attention of the reporters and prompted them to record her name. Perhaps it was the graphic account of brutality that made... Sorry, I lost my place. Perhaps it was the graphic account of brutality that made her words more noteworthy than the others. Did she describe more vividly the utter aloneness of the dungeon, how it felt to be cut off from the world and cast out again, and that in the darkness, shouting out and hearing the voices of others was your own lifeline? Or how your heart raced because you were afraid you might drown, even when you knew it was just a pail of water, but hell, it might as well have been the Atlantic. The fight to breathe waged again. How long could one live underwater? That's a... Yeah. How long can one live underwater? The world went black, and when your eyes opened, you were beached on the dark floor of an isolation cell. Was the body suspended from the door of a neighboring cell yours too? The pain moving and cutting across the body shared by those confined in the 10 cells of the DB? The newspaper offered a pared-down description. Loretta Mitchie testified that she had been handcuffed to the bars of her cell with the tips of her toes touching the floor for so long that she fell when she was released. She also noted that the colored girls were assigned to the worst jobs in the kitchen, the laundry, and the psychiatric unit. Other women reported being stripped and tied naked to their cots. They were fed bread and water for a week. They were strung up and suspended in their cells, denied even the smallest relief of toes touching the ground. Esther, too, could have told them about Rebecca Hall. Like Loretta Mitchie, she had been confined in the disciplinary building several times. She could have told them about Peter Quinn and the others slapping and kicking the girls had she been asked to appear. But Peter Quinn didn't need anybody to testify against him. He was one of the few guards who owned up to some of the terrible things he had done, mostly to make Miss Cobb look bad. By his own admission, he helped string up girls about 100 times. He was the one who showed Miss Montague how to first handcuff a girl to the cell partition with her hands back of her. And that he knows that at the time, the feet were always wholly on the floor. Under the direction of Miss Montague, the practice just grew to lift them up a little higher. In December 1919, the women in Lowell Cottage made their voices heard, even if no one wanted to listen. Lowell, Flowers, Gibbons, Sanford, and Harriman were the cottages reserved for Black prisoners. After a scandal about interracial sex and harmful intimacy erupted in 1914, segregation had been imposed in cottages sorted by race as well as age, status, addiction, and capacity. A special provision of the Charities Law permitted the state to practice racial segregation while safeguarding it from legal claims that such practices were unconstitutional and a violation of the state's civil rights laws. The newspaper described the upheaval and resistance of Lowell Cottage as a sonic revolt, a noise strike, the din of an infernal chorus. Collectively, the prisoners had grown weary of gratuitous violence and being punished for trifles. So they sought retribution in noise and destruction. They tossed their mattresses, they broke windows, they set fires. Nearly everyone in the cottage was shouting and screaming and crying out to whoever would listen. They pounded the walls with their fists, finding a shared and steady rhythm that they hoped might topple the cottage, make the walls crumble, smash the cots, destroy the reformatory so that it would never be capable of holding another innocent girl in the jailhouse. The wailing, shrieking chorus protested the conditions of the prison, insisted they had done nothing to justify confinement. They refused to be treated as if they were not human, as if they were waste. The New York Times reported that noise was deafening. Almost every window of the cottage was crowded with Negro women who were shouting, angry, and laughing hysterically. The uproarious din emanating from the cottage smote the ears of the investigators before they got within sight of the building. Songs and shouts were the vehicle of struggle. The chorus spoke with one voice. All of them screamed and cried about the unfairness of being sentenced to Bedford, arrested in a frame-up, the 3 years of life stolen. Were they nothing or nobody? Could they be seized and cast away, and no one in the world would care or even give a damn? Were Harriman and Gibbons and Sanford and Flowers also up in arms a month after Miss Minogue, I can't know how to pronounce that, put her in a chokehold, beat her head with a set of keys, pummeled her with a rubber hose? Maddie Jackson joined the chorus. Excuse me. Thinking about her son and how he was growing up without her made her wail and shout louder. It is not that she or any of the others imagined that their pleas and complaints would gain a hearing outside the cottage or that the findings of the New York State Commission of Prisons would make any difference for them. This riot, like the ones that preceded it and the ones that would follow in its wake, was not unusual. What was unusual was that the riot had been reported at all. The state investigation of abuse and torture at the reformatory made rioting colored women a newsworthy topic. Loretta, or Mickey, as some of her friends called her, beat the walls, bellowed, cursed, and screamed. At 14 years old, before she had her heart for At 14 years old, before she had her first period, before she had a lover, before she penned lines like "Sweetheart, in my dreams, I'm calling you," Mickey waged a small battle against the prison and the damned police and the matrons and the parole officers and the social workers. She was unwilling to pretend that her keepers were anything else. The cottages were not homes. Miss Cobb didn't give a damn about her, and Miss Montague was a thug in a skirt. The matrons were brutes, and not there to guide or provide counsel or assist them in making better lives, but to manage and control, punish and inflict harm. They let you know what they thought. You were being treated too well, and each cruel punishment was deserved, and the only way to communicate with the inmates, especially the colored girls. Miss Dolly, the sociologist, interviewed them. She asked questions and wrote down everything they said, but her recommendation was always the same. Prison is the only place for her. Mickey rebelled without knowing the awful things that the prison staff said about her in their meetings. She was a simple-minded and a liar. She thought too much of herself. She had been with a good many men. The psychologist, Dr. Spaulding, said that she was trying to appear young and innocent, but clearly wasn't. Was it possible that she was just 14 years old? Ms. Cobb decided the matter. Let's just assume she's 18. Everyone believed prison was the best place for a young black woman on an errant path. Staying out all night at a dance with her friends or stealing a $2 to buy a dress so she could perform on stage was sufficient cause to commit her. Mickey cursed and pummeled the wall with her fist and refused to stop no matter how tired. She didn't care if they threw her in the disciplinary building every single day. She would never stop fighting them. She would never submit. Disciplinary report, very troublesome. She has been in Rebecca Hall and the disciplinary building. Punished continually. Friendship with the white girls. She had been in the DV more times than a disciplinary sheet revealed. In Rebecca Hall, she schemed and plotted and incited the other girls to rioting and disorder. She was proud to have been the cause of considerable trouble her entire time at Bedford. When confined in the prison buildings, she managed to send a few letters to her girlfriend. The love letter seized by the matron was written in pencil on toilet paper because she was not allowed pen and paper in confinement. The missive to her girlfriend, Catherine, referred to the earlier riots of 1917. I'm going to start over. The missive to her girlfriend, Catherine, referred to the earlier riots of 1917 and 18 and expressed the spirit of rage and resistance that fueled the December action in Lowell. I get so utterly disgusted with these goddamn cops, I could kill them. They may run Bedford and they may run some of the pussies in Bedford, but they are never going to run Loretta Mitchie. It doesn't pay to be a good fellow in a joint of this kind. But I don't regret anything I ever done. I have been to prison. I've been to prison, Rebecca Hall 3 times, and DV once, and may go again soon, and a few others and myself always got the dirty end. Every time prison would cut up in 1918 or 1917, when police came, whether we were cutting up or not, we were there. They would always string us up or put us in the stairway sheets, but we would cut up all the more. Those were the days when GM was kept up all night and all day. We would wait until she go to bed about 1 o'clock at night, and then we would start, and then we would quiet down about 4 o'clock and start again about 8 in the morning. Then there was a good gang here. Then there was a good gang here. Then we could have those days back again if we only had the women, but we haven't, so why bother? I have only one more day, but when you've had as much punishment as I have, you don't mind it. While the lights are being extinguished, so good night and sweet pleasant dreams, loyally yours, Black Eyes or Mickey. Old Cottage roared with the sounds of upheaval and revolt. They smashed windows of the cottage. Broken windows linked the disorder of the prison to the ghetto, explained the sociologist in a lecture on the culture of poverty. Glints and shards of shattered glass were the language of the riot. Furniture was destroyed. Walls were defaced. Fires started. Like Esther Brown, Mickey didn't hesitate to smash things up. The cottage mates yelled and shouted and cursed for hours, each voice blended with the other in a common tongue. Every utterance and shout made plain the truth. Riot was the only remedy within reach. I'm going to pause right here. It was the dangerous music of upheaval. In mass, they announced what had been endured, what they wanted, what they intended to destroy. Bawling and screaming and cursing made the cottage tremble and corralled them together into one large pulsing formation, and an ensemble reveling in the beauty of the strike. Young women hanging out of the windows, crowding at the doors, and huddling on shared beds sounded a complete revolution, an upheaval of the given, an undoing and remaking of values, which called property and law and social order into crisis. They sought redress amongst themselves. The call and the appeal transformed them from prisoners into rioters, from inmates to fugitives, even if only for 13 hours. In the discordant assembly, they found a hearing in one another. The black noise emanating from Lowell Cottage expressed their rage and their longing. It made manifest a latent rebellion simmering beneath the surface of things. It provided the language in which they lamented their lot and what they called the injustice of their keepers at the top of their voices. To those outside the circle, it was a din without melody or center. The New York Times had trouble deciding which among the sensational headlines they should use for the articles, so it went with three. Devil's Chorus sung by girl rioters. Bedford hears mingled shrieks and squeals suggesting infernos set to jazz. Outbreak purely vocal. What exactly did Dante's Inferno sound like when it transposed into a jazz suite? For the white world, jazz was the synonym for primal sound and savage modernism. It was raw energy and excitement, nonsense and jargon, empty talk, excess, carnal desire. It was slang for copulation and conjured, I accidentally hit the link on the side here. That's neat, though. It has the DOI right there. My apologies. Here we go. For the white world, it was raw energy and excitement, nonsense and jargon, empty talk, excess, carnal desire. It was slang for copulation and conjured social disorder and free love rather than a composition or improvisation. You could take my tie, you could take my collar, but I'll jazz you till you holler. Sonic tumult and upheaval, resistance as music, had to be construed as jazz. It was the only frame to make legible their utterances. In the most basic sense, the sounds emanating from Lowell were the free music of those in captivity, the abolition philosophy expressed within the circle. If freedom and mutual creation defined the music, so too did it refine the strike and riot waged by the prisoners of Lowell. The Reformatory Blues, a facile label coined by the daily newspapers to describe the collective refusal of prisoner conditions, was Dante filtered through Ma Rainey and Buddy Bolden. Their utterances were marked by the long history of Black radical sound. Whoops and hollers, shrieks and squawks, sorrow songs and blues. It was the soundtrack to a history that hurt. The chants and cries escaped the confines of the prison, even if their bodies did not. Almost every window of the cottage was crowded with Negro women who were shouting, crying, and laughing hysterically. Few outside the circle understood the deep resources of this hue and cry. The aesthetic inheritance of jargon and nonsense was nothing if not a philosophy of freedom that reached back to slave songs and circle dances. Struggle and flight, death and refusal became music or moaning or joyful noise or discordant sound. For those within the circle, every groan and cry, curse and shout insisted slavery time was over. They were tired of being abused and confined, and they wanted to be free. Those exact words could be found in letters written by their mothers and husbands and girlfriends. I tell you, Miss Cobb, it is no slave time with colored people now. All of them might well have shouted, no slave time now, abolition now, in the surreal utopian nonsense of it all. And at the heart of the riot was the anarchy of colored girls, treason en masse, tumult, gathering together, the mutual collaboration required to confront the prison authorities and the police, the willingness to lose oneself and become something greater, a chorus, a swarm, an ensemble, a mutual aid society. In lieu of an explanation or an appeal, they shouted and stomped and screamed. How else were they to express the longing to be free? How else were they to make plain their refusal to be governed? Outsiders described the din as a swan song, to signal that their defeat was certain and that they would return to their former state as prisoners without a voice in the world and to whom anything might be done. There was little that was mournful in the chants and curses, the hollers and squawks. This collective utterance was not a dirge. As they crowded in the windows of the cottage, some hanging out and others peeking from the corners, the dangerous music of Black life was unleashed from within the space of captivity. A raucous, polyphonic utterance that sounded beautiful and terrible. Before the riot was quashed, its force touched everyone on the grounds of the prison, and as far away as the tenements, rented rooms, and ramshackle lodging houses of Harlem, Brooklyn, and Staten Island. The noise conveyed the defeat and the aspiration, the beauty, and the wretchedness that was otherwise inaudible to the ears of the world. He revealed a sensibility at odds with the institution's brutal realism. What to make of the utopian impulse that enabled them to believe that anyone cared about what they had to say? What convinced them that the force of their collective utterance was capable of turning anything around? What urged them to create a reservoir of living within the prison's mandated death? What made them tireless? The next month, the prisoners confined in Rebecca Hall waged another noise strike. Prisoners began to jangle their cell doors, throw furniture against the walls, scream, sing, and use profanity. In the opinion of one of the noisemakers, the medley of sounds, the Reformatory Blues, may yet make a hit on Broadway, even if the officials appear to disdain jazz. They carried on all night in the prison building. They rioted again in July, August, and November. The chants and cries insisted, "We want to be free." The strike begged the question, "Why are we locked up in here? Why have you stolen our lives? Why do you beat us like dogs, starve us, pull our hair from our heads, gag us, club us over the head? It isn't right to take our lives. No one deserved to be treated like this." All those listening on the outside could discern were gales of catcalls, hurricanes of screams, cyclones of rage, tornadoes of squalls. The sounds yielded to one hair-raising, ear-testing devil's chorus. Those inside the circle listened for the love and disappointment, the longing and the outrage that fueled this collective utterance. They channeled the fears and the hopes of the ones who loved them, the bad dreams and the nightmares about children stolen away by white men and lost at sea. The refrains were redolent. Redolent? Gotta Google that. Redolent. Strongly reminiscent or suggestive of. Fragrant or sweet smelling. Redolent. Evocative, suggestive. Redolent. The refrains were suggestive, with all the lovely plans about what they would do once they were free. These sounds traveled through the night air. The speculative history of Esther Brown is based on the statement of the girl, the interviews with her family members, the verified history, personal and institutional correspondence, notes of staff meetings found at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, 14610-77B, inmate case files, records of the Department of Correctional Services, New York State Archives. The New York State Archives require that the names of the prisoners be changed to maintain the privacy of the records. See inmate file number S2507, 2503, 2466, and 4092. The Bedford prison files are very detailed, particularly until the year 1920, when the Laboratory of Social Hygiene conducted extensive intake interviews of the girls and women upon their arrival. The intake process included personal interviews, family histories, interviews with the neighbors, employers, and teachers, psychological tests, physical examinations, intelligence tests, social investigators' reports, as well as the reports of probation officers, school report cards, letters from former employers, and other state records from training schools and orphanages. Following a 2-week evaluation of the compiled materials, physicians, psychologists, social workers, sociologists, and prison superintendents met to discuss each individual case. The idea of indeterminate sentencing was based on the notion that punishment must be tailored to the requirements of the individual prisoners. In practice, this resulted in sentences as long as 3 years for status offenses and the likelihood of future crime. The files contained personal correspondence, discussions of sexual history, life experiences, family background, hobbies, as well as poems and plays written by the prisoners. The case file intended to produce deep knowledge of the individual in a genre that combined sociological investigation with literary fiction, creating a statistical portrait of the young woman. The importance of the case file was critical to prison reform, and the idea that probation, punishment, and parole must be individually suited to each offender. This approach favored indeterminate sentencing. In practice, this meant that for status offenses and the likelihood of future criminality or the likelihood to become morally depraved, a young woman might spend 3 years confined at Bedford and be entangled with the criminal justice system and under state surveillance for a decade of her life. The case was grounded in a hermeneutics of suspicion and a horizon of reform. It was an exemplary product of the therapeutic state. Wow. Wow. Powerful stuff. So, I'm going to try to do another one today. May happen, may not happen, but I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to the next recording. Hope you have a good day.